If you follow the numbers proposed by President Bush and General David Petraeus, nearly 30,000 more U.S. forces will be in Iraq when the surge reaches its peak. But will the additional troops be fully trained for the mission? And is the buildup threatening to break the back of the U.S. military? In Atlanta, former Assistant Defense Secretary, now at the Center for American Progress, Lawrence Korb. He is a critic of the war in Iraq. And here in Washington, CNN military analyst Brigadier General James Spider Marks, U.S. Army retired. Lawrence Korb, in a recent report for the Center for American Progress titled Beyond the Call of Duty, wrote, quote, Bush's latest escalation threatens to inflict serious long-term damage to the force, talking about the U.S. military. Spider Marks, you had a meeting this past week with Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, some other high-level Pentagon officials. Are they concerned? What are their thoughts about the force readiness?
Well, as characterized by the Secretary of Defense and some of his key guys, is there's no crisis in readiness right now. There clearly isn't. The troops are trained and ready for this combat and this fight that exists today. There certainly is concern down the road for what's called full spectrum operations.
Do you agree with that, Lawrence Korb? There's no crisis now?
Oh, I think there is. If you take a look, for example, at two of the brigades of the 3rd Infantry Division that are part of this surge, in one brigade, 62 young men and women joined that brigade right out of basic training, missed the training that they had at the National Training Center, were sent to Iraq 3 weeks later with only 10 days of training. One is already dead. You have another brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division from Fort Benning where 75 soldiers basically were too injured to go, and they gave them a quick medical and changed the diagnosis. No, I think we're sending people over there who really are not trained the way that they should be to deal with, which is essentially a war of choice.
Right. We should point out, too, Lawrence, that the military has denied that those soldiers at Fort Benning were reclassified just to keep the numbers up. That's a topic that we actually took on last week. But Spider, the 82nd Airborne has always had a ready brigade. And we're reading stories this past week that they may not be so ready anymore.
Well, the readiness level is there. I've got to disagree with Dr. Korb. The readiness level, these units are ready to fight today. And in fact, there's a term that's been coined, which is just-in-time units. It used to be just-in-time logistics. It's now just-in-time units. I'm okay with that, and the American public should be okay with that. So the unit readiness is there. It's just not enough numbers.
But when we talk about how thinly the military is stretched, and this is a topic that we cover an awful lot, let's take a look at how Barbara Starr reported on that on Monday.
Today, nearly half of the Army's combat brigades are already tied up fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the Army wants billions of dollars for the 18,000 additional improved armored vehicles urgently needed in Iraq.
So, Spider, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the military guidelines that only a third of combat brigades should be deployed at any one time? And I think it's 20 out of 42 are actively deployed now or on their way or coming out of rotation.
John, the guidelines really affect the reserve component, and it has been in writing for years. It's kind of been the script, which is 2 years mobilization and 5 years in what's called dwell time. Those rules have been busted, absolutely.
So are we overextended?
Sure, we're overextended, absolutely, but we're bringing forces forward that are prepared to meet the task. Overextended and being ready are two separate topics.
Larry Korb, what's this doing to forces back home, particularly the National Guard? Also, what are the implications for recruiting, for the command structure?
Well, I mean, basically, the National Guard Commission just reported that 88% of the Guard units are not ready. We're going to be sending 4 Guard units over as part of this surge. They haven't had the equipment to train on. And if you take a look at the people coming into the active duty Army last year, more than 10% had moral waivers. That is for things like criminal convictions. I disagree with the General. I think you owe it to the men and women to give them the 2 years of dwell time before they go back. I mean, because these are the standards we established when I was in there to ensure that it would be fair to them when we're asking them to do so much.
Well, Spider, what about that idea that recruiting standards are being dropped to keep the numbers up? And this idea that because, I believe it was 100% of captains were promoted to majors, you're getting these very swift promotions, that you may be degrading the command structure.
It is way too soon to draw the conclusion that standards are being dropped. Again, this is not the issue. The issue absolutely is, and I agree with Dr. Korb on this, are we breaking faith with the National Guard? Yeah, doggone it, we have broken faith. They thought they were a train, mobilize, train, and deploy force. They are a train, mobilize, and deploy force, and then deploy again. So the dwell time doesn't exist.
Larry, you also wrote in your article, quote, this is about the effect on personnel. An Army survey revealed that soldiers are 50% more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder if they serve more than one tour. Since the 2003 invasion, the suicide rate among troops deployed for the Iraq War reached its highest point in 2006, according to an Army mental health study. Any question, Larry, that this is taking a toll on not only the mental and emotional health of soldiers, but the personal lives of them as well, including their families?
Well, no doubt about it. If you look at the 172nd Stryker Brigade, which was extended 4 months recently, and you look at what happened to the families there, you had suicides among some of the families, premature births. So this idea that somehow you can keep doing this over and over again and not suffer long-term consequences, I mean, I think we need to realize the toll that this is taking. And in fact, you looked at the testimony of people like General Cody, the Vice Chief of Staff. They talk about death spiral. This is something we went through once in the late 70s, and it took us about 10 years to recover from.
Now, I wrote a lot with those guys from the 172nd Stryker Brigade, and I know the effect that the extension was having on them. Very quickly, Spider, if you could. If the military is affected to this degree, can the new security plan for Iraq be successful?
It's going to be successful primarily because the numbers exist today and the troops are trained today. Is there a long-term downstream effect? You bet. And we better be addressing that.
Spider Marks, thanks very much. Lawrence Korb, to you as well. Good to have you on the program finally.
Nice to be with you.
Later on this week at War, Russia takes the